what a year this will be as we get out of COVID and our economic crisis, and we focus on leadership, specifically of the private sector. The private sector is standing up, and we salute you. And there's none better than CEOs. And we say thank you for our CEOs today, for our roundtable, to Robert Reiss of the CEO Forum, to Becky Shambaugh of Shambaugh Leadership. Thank you. What we know with WBC is that within 22 months, we've become the business women's movement. 43 amazing women business organizations partners who are galvanized around 9 action areas. And as you know, with Catalyst and C200, we produced the first ever Women's CEO report the end of October. And as of February, as we all attest, we will finally be at 41 women CEOs at the top in the Fortune space. That means 8.2%, as opposed to back to 5.7% 2 years ago. We're making change, and we will call every company out. Secondly, in the C-suite, we have 7 groups working to change the C-suite on the board level. We've seen more change on corporate boards in 2020. In fact, working with Equilar, we put out a monthly report of women joining public boards. And in October, November, December, we averaged 41% women for the first time in history, and 1/3 of those women of color. And as we work on entrepreneurship and capital, and then the capital issue, as we represent that today, which is clearly with Erik Anderson, we are trying to change the 5% women in capital in such a major way, and on and on. But emblematic of that success are the 3 CEOs speaking today with Robert Reiss and Becky Shambaugh. Thank you for being part of our movement and our leadership. Have a great roundtable.
Thanks, Edie.
Well, thank you, Edie. And on behalf of Becky and myself, we welcome you, and we're excited to have you here. We have 3 tremendous CEOs who are really transformative and are shaping business, the economy, and society. So I'll give you a quick snapshot of who they are, and then we're going to interview them one by one. And please chat. Gosh, we're in the hundreds already. A lot of people viewing in. So we're first going to speak with Melissa Smith, who is the CEO and chair of WEX, which is a leading Fortune 1000 fintech company. And we're going to talk about really the great thing they have is their customer experience is unparalleled, and it's all built on their culture. And at the core of that is gender equity. So we'll learn more about that. And I will say, I asked Melissa in advance if it's okay to hear, but you'll actually hear, she was, I think, the only CEO of a major organization. And by the way, they were not Fortune 1000 before she joined, and they are now. But she was actually, at the same time that she became CEO, she was pregnant. And I think that's the first time in history that I had heard of that. But that's a fun thing, but you'll hear more about that. Then we're going to hear from Erik Anderson. And a lot of you probably know of Topgolf, one of the most fun entertainment venues ever. And he was the one who built the organization from the founders. Now he's going to become vice chair of Callaway through the merger there. So anyone who likes golf, you'll hear about that. But perhaps more significantly, he's going to talk at a higher level through West River Organization, which he's CEO of, about what's happening with women in financial services and why there is not gender equity right now. But he is someone, I was going to say a man with a plan. and Edie, we need the men as well as the women. We're all in this together, right? And then our finale is going to be Erica Lee, and she is the CEO of Marquis Who's Who. Now, this is an organization, it's been around for 120 years, since 1898. Imagine this, she's the first woman CEO and also African-American and Asian to boot. But here's what we're going to learn about from her. There is a special word that she's told me about called syndemic. You are going to learn what that word means and why it's so important. So let's get started. And I'm going to start off with the interview with Melissa, and then I'm going to hand it over to Becky. So first, can you tell everyone about what WEX is as a leading technology pay provider?
Sure. Thanks, Robert. It's good to see everybody.
Good to
The fortunate enough to work for WEX. WEX is a payment technology company, and we work with businesses all over the world. Our customer is always a business, but consumers use our products. So places where you might have touched our business, if you have a tax deferred account, like an HSA account or an FSA account, we are likely the technology that sits behind that. We service more than 50% of the Fortune 1000 companies that are providing that benefit to their employees. We also touch on accounts payable automation, fleet payments, and travel payments. So lots of different avenues here.
It's a large organization, 1.7 billion in revenue, 5,000 employees. And by the way, there are only one of 3 women on Fortune 100's fastest growing organizations. So I want you to talk about what you've done really, because you have this incredible customer model where you do 10-year contracts, where you've kept customers engaged for 20 years. And at the center of everything is really this gender equity model. So you could share with everyone first what it was like, actually being pregnant at the same time, because I think that was unprecedented, but then talk about your whole gender model, because I think it's a tremendous model that we all can learn from, of building. And I've been a student of great companies. WEX, I will say, is a great company.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm most proud of at WEX is, when I first started, we were about 50 million in revenue. So you talked about it being 1.7 billion. So we've been on this tremendous growth path, but I would say it's always been really led by our values. And, inclusiveness is something that really started from the beginning. It was part of the original origins of the company. And, it's embedded in our compensation structures, our reward systems around not just what you do, but how you do it. And I think that was foundational for the company. And, as we've gotten bigger, we've had to formalize some of those things that would have happened naturally. But what I am proud of, talked about gender being in the center of that, I would actually characterize it probably a little bit differently, in that it's more about the best athlete. So we've been really focused around making sure that there's a performance culture, that the best athlete gets picked. And as a result, if you look at the team, 30% of our board are women, our public company board, 40% of the executive leadership team are female. It's 50-50, even though we're a tech company, male, female. And I think there's a lot of feeders around that, but it really starts with this idea that we want to make sure that people feel like they're included, that they're empowered, that they have a voice. And again, as we've gotten bigger, we formalize that through affinity groups and through processes around how we're hiring and how we're promoting.
And I commend you on building the processes so you can continue to expand and increase in everything you've done as a tremendous company. Now going to hand it over to Becky.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for everyone. It's great to be here and a great way to launch the new year. We have a tremendous amount of eager people to learn, and I'm excited that the 3 of you are going to give us so much knowledge around this. Melissa, given that you are a CEO, and congratulations, we honor everything that you have done and been a role model for so many other women and men. But there are a lot of, women and men on this call that have aspirations to be a CEO or to further advance their careers in the senior leadership ranks. And so from your seat, from your wisdom, what advice do you give, folks to really manage their career path? What have been some hurdles you've overcome? Any tips or practices that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, sure. I think fundamentally it depends on where you're coming from. I came from a staff function, so I was the CFO of the company, originally, and actually when we went public. And so what I had to work on was broadening my skill set. And I think that's true kind of no matter which place you come from. From a staff function, you have to learn how to build sales capability or sales management capability and experience running a P&L. And it's really important to be able to, to fulfill all the aspects of that, because in large part, as CEO, what you're trying to do is do a really good job setting expectations and then making sure you're delivering against those. So if you have a background that's staff related, then I would encourage you to take some risk and find a role where you can broaden your experience, maybe take on P&L responsibility. And then, the flip of that is if you're in a P&L type of roles, make sure that you're broadening your skill set and you really understand the finance aspects of what you're doing. It's important as a CEO, but also, have some level of knowledge around each of the respective staff areas. And I think that was really important. And the second thing I'd say is sponsorship, which I can't say enough to the people who are out there. I really feel like a big part of my career trajectory was because I like people and I naturally built a lot of really strong relationships. And I don't know that I had put a lot of thought into the why I was doing it. I did it because it felt natural. But the kind of the net benefit of that was, when you get to decision points around who was going to get promoted, I had people who were in my court, and also I had a chance of getting really tremendous feedback from people who had my best interest at heart along the way. And I always say, honor feedback, even if it's brutal at the point in time. When you find sponsors, look for people who are willing to actually be really, really candid with you.
Yeah, I think that mentorship is one thing, but sponsorship is where we get the lift, right? And I think, sponsorship for ourselves, but we as men and women, if we're getting that sponsorship, is also to be on the other end, right? And look at ways that we can sponsor, be an ally for others. So I did have a second level question on the P&L, because we've got a lot of people in finance here, math, accounting. It's one thing to just do the numbers on a spreadsheet, right? But it's another thing to really get that rich experience around running a P&L and differentiating yourself. Can you share with us the top two things about the value of being able to run a P&L? How does that benefit you in terms of broadening your portfolio and how you look at things, how you manage or lead an operation?
Yeah, there's always the best laid plan, meaning, you roll out a vision of what you want things to look like, you create a plan, and, invariably things just don't happen the way you expect they're going to happen. And so what you need to learn is the skill of thinking of your contingency plan, and also just being nimble enough to adjust to the environment you're in. I also think it's really important, if you haven't gotten out and been on a prospect call, do that. It's really, it gives you an appreciation when you're in the front lines and you actually go out and go through a sales pitch. It gives you a whole different level of appreciation of what that work is like. And I also think, like, really spending time with your existing customers. Robert talked about the culture that we have, the relationships we have with our customers, and that comes from making sure that you're staying in contact, that you're listening to what they need. All of that helps you as you're making choices around product or capital allocation. You're just much more in touch with the market needs.
Right. I think it's really important, because I think that's one thing is saying get P&L experience, but what does it do to really enrich your leadership, right, and expand your aperture? The last question I had, and we can all chime in on this, there's been an extraordinary exodus of women, regretfully, in organizations and within certain industries. But Melissa, I'd love to get your advice, because this is the loss not only for the women, but for organizations and customers and marketplace. So what advice do you have for organizations and for women right now during these unfortunate times with some of these women leaving so many companies?
Yeah, and I would put that in two different buckets. I think for companies, flexibility is it's just really important. It's really important to everybody right now, but I think it's particularly important to women. So as we think about one of the, the lessons learned through this pandemic period is we can be way more flexible than we ever thought we could be. And so I would just roll into that and embrace it and, build upon that, because it's a way you actually can, attract and retain, great employees. And so I think that's really important. I also think community is really important. One of the things that I focused on, really my whole career is creating networks for women. Within WEX, it's the Women at WEX. So hello to anybody out there who's part of the Women at WEX. It was the first affinity group that we set up within WEX. And I've done that also external to WEX, because I think it's really important for women to be able to talk to other women and normalize the things that they're going through. I think women tend to look at things and think they're the only ones, and they perceive other people to be really buttoned up. And we want to be able to pull back that layer and really talk through, no one's perfect. Our whole lives affect what we do every day, if that's our kids at home or, anything that's going on externally, you really can't 100% compartmentalize that. And so having other people to share that journey with is really important. Robert talked about the fact I was pregnant. And I used to laugh and say, simultaneously at the same point I accepted the role of CEO at WEX, I became pregnant. And so, I haven't known it any other way. I have 3 small children, and that's been my world as I've been here at WEX. But what I would also say to those of you who are watching and listening, if I had projected forward my life when I was in my 20s, I would have expected I had my kids much younger, and that just wasn't my path. And so don't make decisions now that are based on how you perceive your life to play out, because it's like business. It doesn't happen the way you expect it's going to happen often. And so I had my first child when I was in my early 40s. And I think of that as if I had decided not to take certain assignments because I thought I was going to have children, my career probably would have ended up in a different spot. So please make sure that you're making decisions based on where you are at the moment you're in, and negotiate with your partner at home as well as you negotiate at work as you think about segregation of workflow at home.
I think those are really relevant. And I think sometimes we don't know the influence or power that we have. And the fact of the matter is, when I was going through my early on career life, I didn't know I could negotiate. I didn't know I could ask or challenge the status quo, right? And so I think that takes courage, but it takes sponsors, it takes advocates, ambassadors around you to play that out, right? And how's that going to really work in terms of negotiating in such a way that it's fair and you earn that respect and credibility?
I think that what you just said is really important. Someone can always say no, right? That it actually, and I'll see that if I look across my team, the women are less likely to ask than the men. And I think that, and I think of that in the category of sometimes it's harder for women to negotiate for themselves. They're really good negotiators on behalf of the business, but I just emphasize, if there's something you need in order to make the situation work for you, please make sure you're asking for it. They can always say no.
I have one more big question for you. It came in on the chat as well. So given that you have an equitable organization, you're kind of a role model, all the 3 CEOs are, what was the biggest challenge that you overcame to really get to where you are now around equity? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, I actually would say we're not done yet on the equity side. I think there's a lot more that we can do to, I would love to have 50% representation across all of our leadership categories between men and women. We're not there yet. And so I don't want to do the victory lap yet, because I think there's a lot more that we can do. And we're just starting our journey thinking about that in terms of adding in other racial profiles, as we think about what we want our company to look like. Part of why we added in a lot more process around hiring and promotions was to also think about that in terms of making sure that we were increasing all levels of diversity in the company. But I'd say the biggest things, inclusiveness is really important. And I think sometimes that's the hardest thing to get at. And so I think some of the things that have been really important to us As I started, I put women in those top slots. I went externally to do that, even though we actually had a pretty good pipe. I supplemented that with some external hires. And I think that in that, I was looking for diversity of thought. I was looking for people who had different backgrounds. And now we have, more than 50% of the people were born outside the United States, 40% are female. It's really good mix. And I think that helped from just setting the tone. I think the hardest thing for me in managing that is I have people who fundamentally think about things very differently within that group. I've got some people who've only worked for small companies and people who've only worked for large companies. So even beyond gender diversity, it's just, diversity of thought. So getting people to ultimately get on the same page when they come in with very, very different viewpoints is really hard. So when you get to the point where you actually have that diversity of thought, you have to really be clear of how you're going to bound it and make sure that it stays healthy. Because it's, it sounds great, but it's actually really hard when you're in the process of it.
Yeah, I will just say thank you for that. I think one of the most challenging things when we launch inclusion and diversity is the why. We think it's statistics, the metrics, right? But what's the with them for everybody? And I think that you articulated that as a leader, creating culture and transforming culture. It's the why and how that connects to everyone's intrinsic motivations and definition of that why, right? And so you're in the middle of the circle there, and I think that's the secret sauce for you. You've taken this very personally and at heart, and see this as a part of your leadership dashboard. So thank you, Melissa. I'm going to turn it over to Robert now, and we'll take some time to hear from Erik.
Okay, well, thank you, Becky. And I also want to thank one really important thing that Melissa said, that if anyone's CEOs listening in, and if you're running divisions as well, and even if you're not, it's flexibility. If you could create an environment of flexibility, it is such a competitive advantage. And in addition to that, it's the right thing to do. So thank you again, Melissa. So Erik, let's start talking about, let's start off with, I was at this like in Atlanta or something, and one of my executives was with me, said, I'm going to take you to the best place ever. And it was Topgolf. And this is so much fun. If you've never been there, could you just explain first what Topgolf is, but really what lessons you've learned on leadership from building the organization, which I believe now is about 50 different locations?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to be here, and Edie, to the organization. Happy to be helping and supporting. And Melissa, what a great story. So that's just fantastic and just amazing success. So great role model, very aspirational, inspirational for so many, all genders, I would say there. Yeah. Well, Topgolf, I suppose what we learned, and in interest of time to keep on the gender topic, and I'm forever, no matter what I do, someone's going to be, it's a Topgolf guy. So I've learned to live with that now, which isn't bad. Nothing bad about that. But I think the fundamental lesson of leadership from Topgolf was, to get the culture right and get the purpose right. And the purpose at Topgolf, which evolved over almost 20 years, where I was involved in trying to be part of the leadership team, was about connecting people in meaningful ways and creating moments that matter for everyone. And those became the fundamental things that everybody woke up in the morning thinking about. And I used to laugh because I spoke to a lot of people. There's 23,000 people who work at Topgolf now, and we turn about 16,000 of those over every year. So if you think of how many people you've actually touched with their jobs, it's quite a large number. But I used to laugh and say, I don't think anyone gets up in the morning, to make Erik feel better or help him, buy more donuts or anything like that. I don't think that they would have come in at 10 in the morning. But when you empower them to say, we want you to connect people, we want you to create moments, and they have that sense of empowerment and action around connect and create, then they just show up, and they love the customers, they love helping, and there's just thousands and thousands of stories where they've touched so many lives, and getting behind that, and then the culture, respect, and supporting diversity, inclusion. And we used to tell everybody, you could bring your whole self to work, right? We loved all of you, so all parts of you. So we wanted to see, all of you, working with our customers and fans and with the associates. So those were the two big things for that.
Okay, Erik, let's shift over to Wall Street. And you've been involved in finance, a debt equity guy in ventures for years and years. And what would you say is so wrong with Wall Street? And what is your vision of how Wall Street can improve in terms of gender equity? And you could talk about also some of the great things you're doing at West River.
Well, gosh, what's wrong with Wall Street? It was not. I think it wasn't a safe environment. And I'll make a funny story about when I was working on Wall Street, I always felt supported, and I think the safety is really crucial to inclusion and flexibility. So what I mean by that is that when I was working at Wall Street at a well-known firm, I was very supported. What very supported meant was that they would have dinner for me every night at 9 or 10 o'clock. And if I worked past 11, I could get a charge-in ride home. That is a very supportive environment, right? Because I had everything as long as I wanted to work all the time, which I did. I mean, I worked all the time. The difference between support and safety at our organization, and we talk about safety, is two fun stories. I had two young people who got married this year, or I guess the beginning of this year, and I told them, when we talked at the beginning of the year, I said, "What's job number one for you this year?" And I've got to get deals done, or I've got to do this. I said, "No, you've just got to get your marriage off to a good start." Right. So every time I talk to them and they laugh, I go, "How are we doing on job number one?" And that means that they can tell me no, or people know if they need to do something, in-laws, whatever the famous in-laws story, that's job number one. And that's what I expect, that's what I expect of them. We have a person who is an important leader, has young children, and safety means that when you go on Wednesdays, that you stay at school, right? In the morning. I don't care if you're here at 9 or 10. And she would laugh and say, "Well, I don't need to do that every day." And I said, "Well, that's also true. You don't have to stay every day," and talk to all the parents. But that's that sense of safety, right? That we're managing or working with people over a 20-year journey of their life. They'll get married, they'll have children, someone will have an illness, they might go through a divorce. Just everything will happen to your colleagues, and you want it to make safe. Safe doesn't mean easy. It doesn't mean it's not rigorous. It doesn't mean you don't compete hard. It doesn't mean you perform. It means safe. And I'm not saying we hit that safety standard all the time. I think some of my colleagues are on the phone, but I think in terms of safety now. And so I don't think Wall Street, I don't think many places are safe. So I think to be a safe leader really requires a certain amount, really requires you to do your job as a CEO exceptionally well, right? It means you have to absorb the risk and the volatility that you should absorb, and not try to push, the last mile or the last quarter or the last day of sales down in the organization, all the time. I mean, so you have to really be thoughtful and know what you absorb. And, I learned that from my mom. My mom was a nurse. I always say I was raised by a nurse, and she built a nursing college. And so I had an excellent role model in terms of building a university. But I remember one time when she had to let somebody go, and I was sitting there, and I was 12 or something. And she said, "Whose fault was that?" And she said, "It was my fault." Because she said, I didn't give them the right tools. I didn't get them in the right job. I did things. It wasn't somebody who didn't perform. So I've always taken, you have to absorb the right level of risk to be a safe leader. So those are, and that's what's wrong with Wall Street. In fact, that's what's wrong with most things. People think in terms of performance. But we know research tells you, and my colleague Lisa Stone, we have research on diversity. Research says that you only thrive, your brain only thrives in a safe environment. But again, safe doesn't mean easy. It means you can come, like Melissa said, you can ask hard questions, you can advocate for yourself. People are going to listen to you, right? But you also have to listen to them, and you have to trust them. And so you can get better, and you can get feedback and input and all these things. So I really started to think pretty deeply about, leadership built from a platform of safety.
And Erik, that's really interesting, because I will say very few of the CEOs I interview who aren't like running manufacturing where safety is OSHA compliant, you brought a whole new context to what safety means in terms of building a corporate society and environment. Becky, all yours.
Thank you. Well, Erik, wonderful to have you here. And as we opened up, I mean, the day that we achieve gender equity, the day that we really drive inclusion and permeate it in the world of our culture, is the day that we have everyone in the circle, right? And so we need men to be a part of that as equally as women. So thank you for your support and all the great work and being a role model for so many of us out here today. I had a question though, and I know that in getting to know you that there's great value of men and women working together. Robert and I work together, and I think it's that collaboration, hence WBC mission, that brings a richness to this dialogue every month. But I'd love to hear from you. What motivated you, inspired you to start doing this work around men and women together, leading as two, sharing the power? And then the big question is, how are you able to, what are you doing to put that in place or to reinforce that within your organizations?
Well, I wanted to build the next version of West River. And when I was just looking at things and paying attention to diversity in general, even though people say, great job, I want to be a little humble here. I am 60 years old, so it might have taken a little longer than necessary to get to this point. So just to put the context of humility there. But it really was this idea of trying to build a place for 20 years where everyone would want to work and thrive for 20 years. And how would you do that? And then, not having my head in the sand, it's like we can say, we're missing half the population in the world. So half the intellectual capital in the world isn't working on this problem. And there's no planet on which that makes sense. It just doesn't make any sense. So, and I had some great colleagues, Jennifer Ocker, Stanford, Lisa Stone, Shambaugh, all of my partners. We really sort of tore it all up and what we created a new, origin story. And it was, you had to build around diversity and had to be, by rule. It wasn't best efforts. It wasn't a try thing. It was, this is just, what we're doing. Just like Melissa talked about, right? This is just what we're going to do. The other insight on how to do that was not to use a narrow lens. So I tell people, I don't even think in terms of who's the best person anymore. That's no longer an idea for me. The only idea for me is, am I building the best team? And as soon as your mindset is this the best team, you no longer put yourself through narrow screens. And the narrowest screen in investments is the infamous track record, right? Do you have track record? And so the math never works. If you have to have, it's like, how do I get my first job? Well, you have to go get a job. It's the age old chicken and egg. It's all stupid thinking, right? It's very bad thinking. And it is thinking that's driven by privilege, right? I went to Stanford, I went to Harvard. 75% of the venture community comes out of Stanford or Harvard. We all know that we like people who think like us, look like us, we can talk to, right? And those aren't even evil people. It's just a bad design. It's just a bad system. So, we had to just start over, which is what we did at West River. We started over. We have 3 groups. They're co-led. They're all, men and women. But I don't think in terms of individuals anymore. I think in terms of team. And as soon as you think about the best team, you don't want 7 of the same people, right? That makes no sense, right? I do not need a West River, another person who knows how to do, valuation and look at comps and figure out how to do valuation for something. I need someone like Lisa Stone who knows how to build global communities, right? And can look at that. And I need people like Anthony Bontrager who are operating executives and leaders, right? And know how to, and then know how to work together. And, like, my colleague Deepa, who knows, who's been in the Blue Cross, and then people with rich experiences, right? People who faced all kinds of challenges and adversity. So it's a rule. It's like Nike, we just do it. In fact, it's not optional. As soon as you make it not optional, it's not optional. And then you just adapt, you have to adapt and work in that environment. And we're seeing amazing early success. We've been at this for 18 months. We have a great white paper that our whole team worked on. It's deeply researched. It's on our website. And but I was just we had a conversation with a very senior partner we're working with, multi-billion dollar, private equity group, great group, working with one of our women partners, and they're just so high on one of our women partners. Had we used, right, the original screens of things like this, right, the people who are getting the options and the access, right, the access to capital at the 40-50 billion dollar level, it'd be almost impossible. And as soon as they're there, right, they're producing and participating at a full level like any other partner. So you have to break it, you have to set the rules, and then you have to advocate, right? I try to be, West River is a platform that advocates for diversity, not just the individual, but forces it. When we did our SPAC, we diversified the board, and we work on it every day, and we're getting wins, and people are excited about it. I'm not facing a lot of headwinds. We are sometimes. So that's how we did it. But that's what we're trying to do.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for your work. And we're eager to learn how this evolves in the next 18 months, the next 10 months.
Yeah, so are we.
Yeah. But it's interesting at a fundamental level, you're shifting how people see things. And I think moving beyond that traditional labeling to seeing a diverse team with men, women, and those of different perspectives, and begin to renormalize what they're used to seeing, right? Because I think we just take shortcuts based on what we're used to living and seeing every day. So great story. Thank you for.
We talk a lot about sort of playing with confidence, right? And I had my son. Some of my children were they were competitive athletes as well as other things. And my son played a lot of soccer, and we had coaches. You have to play meaner, be more aggressive, and none of those became necessarily the right word. So the word that came to my mind working with him, and we talk about it inside of our organization, is we want to play with confidence, right? My mother used to say, we're fearless, not reckless, right? When she starts something. But I find confidence is a gender neutral word. So words matter, right? Aggressive or play hard is like, and sports is, but think and play and participate with confidence. I think is, again, it's sort of a good North Star. And one of my partners, women partner, we were on the phone the other day, and she was doing some good things. And I said, just, we can be confident, right? Our strategy works. We're having wins. We can be confident.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for some very practical things we can put in use today on the gender balance and inclusion. Thank you so much.
It's exciting to do this.
We're excited for you, so more to come. Erica, great to have you here. I'm going to turn it over to Robert and learn more from you today.
Okay, well, welcome, Erica. I do have to say, when I was about 5 years old, I was with my grandfather, and he shows me this big book, and it's Who's Who. And he's like, Robbie, my boy, this is the book you got to get into. And here you are, Who's Who, founded Marquis Who in 1898. Just so everyone understands, talk through the power of this incredible brand. Are you on mute? Erica, I think you're on mute. You have to be heard.
There we are, right?
There we are.
That's
You say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert, for that introduction. Thank you, Edie, for your insight and your vision, and Becky for the work that you're doing with the collaborative. I'm so excited to be here today and to listen to the other panelists. I share so many of their insights and stories, and it's just great to hear what each person's doing in their own respective companies. So thank you for that. You know, so the term "who's who" is used throughout popular culture all the time. I mean, that's synonymous with somebody being at the top of their field. And a Marquis who's who was started in 1898 by Albert Nelson Marquis, and that's how he pronounced his name actually. And he wanted to travel America, finding the best and the brightest in their respective fields. So he literally went pen and paper to various communities, trying to ascertain who people were there that should be noted in Who's Who in America, which was published in 1899. We've actually covered 22 US presidents since that time. And it's just remarkable that we've been around that long. So Marquis is an invitation only organization. You cannot, but we say you can apply, but you can't buy your way in. And every application is screened and reviewed. And then there's a phone interview with a submissions director in order to be included. So Marquis historically had published 24 different titles, and they were segmented by region or industry. And in the early 2000s, we pivoted and launched a subscription model, which is called Marquis Biographies Online. And some of you who've been to a college might have used that as a reference tool, because it's subscribed to by most major academic institutions, corporate libraries, private libraries, and media outlets as well. But in 2016, when I joined Marquis Who's Who as the Chief Operating Officer, we sort of moved that needle even further, and we're talking about branding. We instituted an entire personal branding division where we focused on lifting these wonderful biographies off the pages of those big books in libraries and really tried to give them life both online and in print. So we were surprised to note that many of our biographical listees don't own their own domain names. And before, you know, and if you learn nothing today, make sure that you do own your domain name, because somebody will buy it when you become powerful, rich, famous, and, you know, and they can find that by doing it through GoDaddy. So make sure you do. So what we've done is we've created a host of products and services like news releases, features in our Millennium magazine, Wall Street Journal features. We also partnered with a United Airlines Hemisphere magazine. And then we brought something really interesting in, which are video biographies and a video interview series with Star Jones, who many of you remember from The View. She's an attorney, a broadcaster, and a celebrity interviewer. So our listees are able to sit down with her with a fireside chat and really get in depth into who they are and what they've done. So that's really cool. I also brought back something that started in 1959, which was Who's Who of American Women. And it went defunct about 10 years ago, and I made sure that we brought that book back. So while I'd say about 60% of our business is driven through personal branding, we also have our listees love the actual physical books as well. And something to note, please look out for our lists we started this year. So we have the Marquis Makers Lists series. Every month we'll be coming out with our list of the top influencers. Next month will be African American Catalyst for Change list. And then celebrating Women's Month in March, we'll have our Women Thought Leaders lists. So those are initiatives that we started this year.
Well, I commend you on that. And, you know, it's a shame, Erica, I didn't know you like 8 years ago, because someone actually was buying all my domain names and I never realized that. That is fantastic advice. You know, so let's shift over to a word called syndemic. That I think it's SYNDEMIC. You're the first person I actually heard it from. I must be pretty naive, but it's really important. Talk about what it is and how it relates to you personally.
Yeah, so it's a word that really means the convergence of multiple epidemics at once that reach their tipping point, and that's what I feel like we saw back in 2020. Whether it was from a public health perspective through COVID, or systemic racism, or gender inequality, these three things really came together and sort of burst open in a way that I believe we needed to get here. It wasn't pretty, and we had to confront and look inward at ourselves and say, sort of, are we doing enough? Maintaining the status quo was no longer acceptable. Companies were forced to take a hard look and address issues within their own corporations. And, we're witnessing those changes, and the change comes from the top down, right? So you're seeing a country change. We're seeing the administration change. We're seeing the first minority and woman vice president, and, the installation of the first female treasury secretary. So companies are really paying attention, and they're changing tides. And so, of course, diversity and inclusion is incredibly important, but it's not just a hip acronym, right? Customers and employees are really holding their companies accountable for diversity and inclusion initiatives. And just because you have a half Black, half Asian female CEO doesn't mean you're born with a DE&I playbook, right? I think part of the shortcomings of last year were that while these upheavals were occurring, companies were looking for the minorities in their midst, and employees, and firing off emails saying, well, you're of this race, or you're of this gender, you have the answers, and I think that's not fair. That wasn't sort of the right or a genuine approach. I think it's important that companies do engage people that know what they're doing in this space, partner with organizations like the American Sustainable Business Council, the Women's Business Collaborative, of course, and subsidize executive learning as well. There are diversity and inclusion courses online given by Cornell University. You can log in and apply today to really start honing in on your own skills.
Okay, so thank you for that, Erica. And I have to tell you, I love your passion, and what you have the ability to do is put everything into perspective, which is critical during these times. Becky, all yours.
Well, all right. I guess we pull the last turn here, Erica. Great stories. And I love your lens on 2020 and what we've learned from that, and how to move forward in terms of what it's really going to take to build that inclusive culture. And honing in on our own lens and taking that accountability for ourselves, right? But listen, congratulations on your recently appointed CEO post. That's certainly an accomplishment, and you've already done great things, but I am just hearing you're going to continue to be a rock star and be a role model for so many women. But with that said, any advice, any stories on how you actually would crack that glass ceiling? I'm sure there are stories going on in your head right now, but if you could share some of those with us. I know Melissa had many stories, and we'd love to hear from you. We have many eager folks on the line that would love to hear from you and learn from that.
Yeah, so this is technically my second week as CEO, so I'm definitely one of the new kids on the block as title goes. But I think that, from a leadership perspective, it was ingrained from young. I came from a family of immigrants. My father, he was the first generation here in the United States. His parents were from Guangdong, China. My mother was born in Jamaica, raised in England, and immigrated to the United States. So I watched them, and as they sacrificed to send both me and my sister to the best schools and set purpose for ourselves. They set the bar very, very high. My mother would say, you can do, so you will do. And that was her motto. There wasn't anything that you couldn't do. So truthfully, it wasn't until I was older that I knew there was a glass ceiling, that I knew it existed, because as I was growing up, there were only limitations from an academic perspective were the ones that I placed on myself. So they drove that importance of education home. They also drove home an incredible work ethic and finishing what you'd started. So I put my heart and soul into everything. I just don't think that there's one necessarily clear path to becoming a CEO, but I do think that there are some things that will help you to obtain leadership positions to put you in the right category to be considered a CEO. And I think one of those things, and this is not a shameless plug for Marquis, but is to read biographies. What's interesting is that Warren Buffett said during a meeting with Columbia Business School students that he changed his life after reading biographies in Who's Who in America. And he sat in the library at Columbia and just read biographies to find out what made someone tick and what made somebody successful. So for me, I followed the careers of Andrea Jung, the former CEO of Avon. And she was, I believe at the time, she was the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And Ursula Burns, who was the former CEO at Xerox as an African-American woman. Where did they get their drive from? What were their pitfalls? So, how did they overcome any of the issues that they faced? So I think learning from their stories paved the way, and they began cracking that ceiling for me. So I learned a lot from them. I also encourage you to join organizations like the Forte Foundation and Elevate. These are powerful organizations for women who are meant to inspire, to have networking opportunities. There are webinars. There's a lot of support there. There's mentorship, as Melissa spoke about. There's sponsorship through these organizations. So try to get into those and surround yourself with inspiring people. I will also say that, to Erik's credit, to Bob's credit, some of my biggest supporters in business have been men. They are the ones that are allowed me to showcase my abilities. And it's essential to have men as allies. They're the ones that will invite you to the table and open those doors for you, so then you can continue to crack that glass ceiling. I think it's also important to find your passion, right? So if you're going to be leading an organization, you want to be able to get up every day and every morning and come with that fire. So make sure that if you don't have passion about what you're doing, then take a look at what you are doing, and maybe it's not the right place for you. So make sure that the work you're doing is meaningful. And then within your own organization, maybe there are groups that you can join. There are opportunities outside of actually what you're doing from a day-to-day perspective, and join and volunteer, and perhaps get yourself in front of some of those senior level executives who will take notice of you and say, oh, I saw her at that event, and introduce yourself to them, and then follow up with an email, and perhaps give some ideas to them of things that you're seeing from your perspective that they can change. And then unless you're building your own business from the ground up, you definitely need experience. As Melissa talked about, getting experience in budgeting and P&Ls and things that you're not strong with. As operating officer, it gave me an ability to have a bird's eye view look at the company. So I think that was a great start from a managerial perspective. But I also think you have to be bold and take big risks and have foresight. I have my own pregnancy story, actually, that happened last year. I was pregnant with my third child, and it was December 31st. I was reading a little bit of a blog right before the ball dropped on December 31st, 2019, and I saw a blurb come in from a Hong Kong paper about a strange pneumonia. And it's something, my spidey senses went off, and I said, I don't know why here, but I want to follow this. And it was January 4th that I was sending emails to friends of mine in medicine, and they said, Erica, you're pregnant, go to sleep. Like, what's wrong with you? And then I started bringing my own PPE from Amazon. My husband thought I'd lost my mind. I start wearing PPE in my office in February. And then I sat down and I took a look at what was going on. And I said, there's a problem here. COVID is here already. We're going to have to pivot. We'll have to figure out, are we ready for at-home work? And I assembled my executive team. I told them that we're running drills because this baby can come while, in the midst of a shutdown. And so what we did is we sprang into action, and immediately we put together a plan for work at home. So I felt better about the fact that I did go into labor as New York did decide to shut down. But by that time, we'd already had a plan in place. There was foresight. we'd run our tests, and we were able to sustain ourselves through COVID. So make sure that you're looking outside of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and start taking the temperature, because there are things that can give you clues to be able to help drive your company forward when there is no playbook.
Right. You know, I love that, Erica. Thank you. Two things I've learned from you is that I think believing in yourself, right? And hanging out with or surrounding yourself with people who believe in you. I mean, that is a big calculus for foundation. And I think don't just work in a vacuum. You have to get out there and sense the environment constantly as a recipe for a CEO. So I want to thank everyone. We're almost at the top of the hour. This was just incredible, right, Robert? What's so much wealth of knowledge and practical things that we can start doing this afternoon. So I want to thank Melissa, Erik, and Erica for your time, your great preparation and great dialogue and candor on your leadership journey and how you've been able to shape and form a culture of safety and inclusion within your organizations and how that's paid off. And Melissa, you know, just some key points here. I just wanted to reflect, there's just so many, but flexibility is key within your work environment and culture. People need to know that they can have a life and they can work at the same time. And I think that was a tenor that rang through this conversation today. And sponsorship, Melissa, thank you for that. That, you know, people articulate that in different ways, but I think you need those sponsors that will give you a lift. But I think also we need to see our role as sponsoring others. So many great things there. Erik is, you know, so notable is getting the culture right. And what stood out for me was creating a culture where people can feel safe coming with their true self, and they will thrive demonstrating their best self, right? So being intentional around creating and fostering that safe environment. And then, you know, using our words wisely. Wow, that is so powerful. And I think that is just something we can think about and pause as we engage in conversations with those around us that may not necessarily think like us or talk like us, as you said. And think of words that connect, that inspire, that cultivate a common sense of purpose with all together. And thank you, by the way, for your work around men and women together, being that power of one. And we are eager to learn more about that. Erica, thank you for your entrepreneurialism, your inspiration that you actually do it and you actually are role modeling that. And I think the day that women believe in themselves, as you shared early on in your childhood, is the day that we will step into our leadership, right? And take our best foot forward and tap into those unique strengths. And to learn about the organization, you know, be relentless. If you want to be a CEO or in senior leadership, you have to be relentless to learn about the workings of the organization, understand how it works, how the cash register works. You know, and as Melissa said, what are the integrated things that connect all the dots, if you will? And so that takes work, rolling up our sleeves. But I think if you want to run a company, you have to understand a P&L and, you know, be willing to roll your sleeves up and do that work. And you'll become so much more knowledgeable, and your dashboard will be so much more of a sort of integrated sort of opportunity to build a software program that helps to run the entire organization with a deep sense of knowledge. So a thank you to you all. In closing, our next CEO Roundtable for WBC will be February 24th. But note this, it'll be from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for joining. And Edie, you have any final remarks?
Thank you, Becky, and thank you, Robert Reiss. And you couldn't have summarized it more. I think with Vex and Melissa, as you started out taking the company from just 50 million to 1.7 billion, but really leading with values and sponsorship, it was just beautiful. And Erik, your commitment to equality and changing the capital industry in a safe way, and everything that Becky just said is just really extraordinary. And Erica, your passion for really driving change and innovation and being bold and taking risk. We've had 3 CEOs today that are such role models. It's humbling to hear you, to have you. And Robert, do you want to say goodbye to us all? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Great job.